In the sealed stillness of an ancient tomb, the most striking treasure is not always a crown, a blade, or a bright metal hammered into shape. Sometimes it is something far quieter, a jar, closed carefully against the air, filled with a substance that still looks alive. Not because it is mysterious, but because it is engineered, molecule by molecule, to resist time. Honey was one of the few materials in the ancient world that could feed you, heal you, preserve your food, and travel long distances without spoiling. For many early societies, that combination made it more than a sweet taste. It made honey a strategic resource, one that could support health, trade, ritual, and survival in a way that glittering metal could not. To understand why, we have to begin where honey begins, inside a colony. A honeybee does not simply collect sweetness. She collects dilute nectar, mostly water, then returns to the hive and passes it mouth to mouth through other workers. Each transfer changes it. Enzymes begin transforming complex plant sugars into simpler ones. The bees spread the liquid thin across wax comb, increasing surface area, and ventilate the hive with coordinated wing beats. Gradually, the water content drops. What started as a fragile floral fluid becomes a dense, concentrated syrup that resists microbial growth. This is not just food storage. It is biochemical preservation. Most bacteria and molds need available water to grow. Honey contains so little usable water and so much dissolved sugar that it creates intense osmotic pressure, drawing water out of microbial cells and slowing or stopping their reproduction. Honey is also naturally acidic, adding another barrier. And when honey is diluted, when it touches a moist surface like a wound or inflamed tissue, enzymes can begin generating small amounts of hydrogen peroxide, a familiar antiseptic. Scientists have also identified additional antimicrobial contributors in some honeys, including plant-derived compounds and an antimicrobial peptide produced by bees. The details vary with floral source and processing, but the pattern is consistent. Honey is hostile territory for many microbes. That combination, stable when dry, active when wet, helps explain why honey moved so naturally into ancient medicine. Long before germ theory, healers noticed outcomes. Wounds treated with honey often developed less odor and appeared to remain cleaner. Honey's viscosity forms a physical barrier, and its chemistry can limit microbial growth while maintaining a moist environment that supports tissue repair. Modern clinical research does not treat honey as a miracle cure, and results depend heavily on the type of wound and the type of honey. But evidence indicates that medical-grade honey can be useful in certain wound care contexts. The ancient observation that honey could support healing has a scientific basis that is now better understood. In a world where infection could quietly turn minor injury into prolonged illness, a stable, portable antimicrobial substance had real value, especially one that did not require metalworking, mining, or a supply chain. And honey offered something else ancient societies rarely had, an energy-dense sweetener that could be stored. Before large-scale sugar production, concentrated sweetness was uncommon. Fruit was seasonal and perishable. Syrups fermented quickly. Honey, by contrast, could be harvested and kept. It could sweeten bitter herbs and make medicines more tolerable. It could preserve plant preparations. It could stabilize foods. It could be carried as a high-calorie travel ration without refrigeration or complex storage technology. This is one reason honey shows up again and again across early civilizations. Not as a culinary novelty, but as a resource woven into systems of health, taxation, and exchange. In ancient Egypt, organized beekeeping was developed early and practiced at scale. Evidence from reliefs and archaeological contexts indicates that Egyptians managed bees in human-made hives and transported colonies along the Nile to follow flowering cycles, essentially practicing a form of seasonal migratory beekeeping. Honey appears in offerings, in medicine, and in economic life. Records and depictions suggest honey could function as a valued commodity, something paid, stored, and moved like wealth. What makes Egypt especially revealing is that honey's value was not symbolic alone. It was practical. In a hot climate, food preservation mattered. In a medical tradition filled with poultices and topical treatments, Honey's antimicrobial properties would have been repeatedly reinforced by experience. Even beeswax, the hive's structural material, had uses that extended honey's importance. Wax could seal containers against moisture and air. It could waterproof. It could support writing tablets. It could serve in ritual and craft. The hive, in other words, was not just a sweetener factory. It was a materials industry. To modern ears, the story that honey never spoils is often repeated too casually. Honey can crystallize, absorb moisture, and ferment if stored improperly. But under stable, dry, sealed conditions, honey's chemistry makes long-term preservation unusually plausible. This is why reports of very old honey remaining intact have persisted in public memory. Honey is one of the rare foods that can remain recognizable across long spans of time when conditions are right. The underlying reasons are not mystical. They are physical chemistry, low water activity, acidity, and sugar saturation. That durability also made honey ideal for trade. A commodity that is light for its value, stable without refrigeration, and useful in multiple industries will naturally circulate. Honey could be exchanged as sweetener, medicine, preservative, and fermentation substrate. Honey and wax both appear as trade goods in historical discussions of ancient commerce, moving alongside other portable valuables. Even when honey was produced locally, it could still be scarce in densely populated regions, or in seasons when nectar flows were limited. That scarcity, combined with its utility, creates a kind of value that is not about shine, but about function. And function, in many ancient economies, was the foundation of wealth. Gold is chemically stable, but you cannot eat it. You cannot give it to a fevered child. You cannot spread it on a wound. You cannot ferment it into a drink that stores calories and preserves plant nutrients. Honey could do these things directly or make them easier. Consider fermentation. When honey is mixed with water, wild yeasts can turn it into alcohol. This is a simple biochemical pathway that humans learned to harness in many places. Archaeological residue studies suggest that very early fermented beverages included honey among their ingredients in some contexts. The details vary by region and time, but honey's role is consistent. It provides fermentable sugars when other concentrated sugar sources are limited. Fermented honey drinks also carry cultural weight, used in ceremonies, feasts, and social bonding, and alcohol itself can serve as a preservative for certain plant extracts. Honey is not just sweetness here. It is a gateway to a controlled transformation. Across the Mediterranean world, honey's presence in cuisine and medicine continued. Greek medical writing and Roman culinary traditions treated honey as a standard ingredient, not a luxury garnish. In Roman recipe collections attributed to Apicius, honey appears frequently, reflecting how central it was in an era without refined sugar as a common household product. Even when other sweeteners existed, reduced grape must. For example, honey retained a special status because it came with additional properties: aroma from flowers, perceived health benefits, and compatibility with medicinal preparations. The deeper you look, the more the pattern emerges. Honey sits at the intersection of ecology, labor, and chemistry. To produce honey reliably, a society must understand seasonal flowering, water access, and safe hive management. Beekeeping requires specialized knowledge and repeated practice. It is not simply gathering, it is animal husbandry of an insect superorganism. That labor concentrates value. A jar of honey represents thousands of flights, millions of blossoms, and careful human handling to collect without ruining the colony. And it ties human wealth to landscape health. A thriving honey harvest implies abundant flowering plants. It implies functional ecosystems. Ancient people did not describe pollination the way modern biology does, but they did observe that bees were linked to fruit set and flowering. Where bees were common, harvests often improved. Where nectar flows were strong, colonies prospered, and people did too. Honey, in this sense, became a visible, tangible summary of ecological productivity. In other regions, different bees produced different honeys, and societies adapted accordingly. In Mesoamerica, for example, stingless bees were managed traditionally, and their honey carried cultural and medicinal significance. The point is not that every civilization valued honey identically, but that many independently recognized its unusual combination of stability and usefulness and built practices around it. So what, then, made honey feel priceless, not in poetry, but in daily reality? It was one of the only substances that combined 5 rare qualities at once. First, it was shelf-stable, often for long periods when stored well. Second, it was biologically active, hostile to many microbes, especially when in contact with moisture. Third, it was energy-dense and palatable, meaning it could support nutrition quickly. Fourth, it was versatile: food, medicine, ritual offering, trade commodity, fermentation base. And fifth, it was renewable but not effortless. It demanded functioning ecosystems and skilled management, making it scarce where flowers, rainfall, or knowledge were limited. Gold is rare because geology is rare. Honey can be rare because life is complex. Modern science has clarified many of the mechanisms that made honey so dependable. We can measure its acidity. We can quantify water activity. We can identify enzymes, peptides, and plant compounds that contribute to antimicrobial effects. We can also see the limits. Honey varies widely by floral source. It can ferment if moisture rises, and not all traditional uses translate cleanly into modern medicine. Researchers continue studying which components matter most, how processing changes activity, and when honey-based treatments are genuinely beneficial, but the central insight remains steady. Ancient people lived close to biological risk. Spoiled food, infected wounds, unpredictable harvests. In that world, a substance that could preserve, nourish, and soothe without fire, without metal tools, without complex infrastructure, earned a kind of trust that a decorative metal could never provide on its own. When a jar of honey was stored with the dead, it was not simply a symbol. It was a practical promise. Sweetness that would not rot, food that could wait, medicine that could travel into uncertainty. When honey moved as tribute or trade, it was not just luxury. It was concentrated landscape flowers made portable. And when early humans risked climbing cliffs for wild comb, long before organized agriculture, they were not chasing a dessert. They were chasing one of nature's most compact survival tools, built by insects, refined by time, and valuable precisely because it worked.